More than ever, in this particular moment, we are all living through what the world most needs is a mind that can settle. We live in what our own era calls the attention economy, a world where every notification, every headline, every alert, every digital pull is designed to ensure your attention never fully lands anywhere. We are overstimulated and depleted at the same time. And most of us haven't noticed how deeply this is changing us. How we think, how we sleep, how we sit in silence, how we connect with the people we love. The Buddhist tradition has a response to this that is 2,500 years old. The old teachers called it mental equilibrium, or in other words, the meditative state. They called it the queen of all meditations, because no matter what practice you wish to develop, no matter what teaching you wish to truly understand, this one comes first. It improves how you work, how you sleep, how you care for others, and how clearly you see your own mind. Without it, nothing penetrates. With it, everything opens. Tonight, you will hear how the old teachers mapped this state and how to begin finding it, using nothing more than the breath already moving through your body right now. Settle in wherever you are. Dim the lights if you can. Put the phone face down and let the weight of everything you've been carrying today begin to soften. From wherever in the world you are listening, you are welcome here. The monkey moves through the trees without stopping. It grabs one branch, finds another, swings toward a fruit, drops it for a different sound, chases that sound until something else catches its eye. It never rests. It never stays. The mind has simply never been shown how. The Buddha offered this image in the teachings, and teachers have returned to it for 2.5 millennia because it is exact. You know this experience. You have felt it in your own life, perhaps more often than you would like to admit. You sit down to read something, and before you have finished the first paragraph, your mind is already somewhere else entirely. Turning over a conversation from this morning, rehearsing something you need to say tomorrow, wondering if you remembered to send that email. You return to the page. 10 seconds later, you are gone again. You lie down to rest and discover that rest has left the building. The body is horizontal, but the mind is pacing. It is going through the list, relitigating the argument, constructing a better version of what you said 3 hours ago. The tiredness is real. You can feel it in your limbs. But rest, actual rest, keeps sliding out of reach. You sit down to meditate, and this is where the scattered mind reveals its full repertoire. Within 90 seconds, the mind has visited the grocery store, designed a response to a critical email, composed a fragment of a song you have not thought about in years, and briefly wondered whether you should repaint the kitchen. The instruction was simple: just sit. And yet here we are. This is not a personal failure. It is the condition. The untrained mind scatters. That is what it does, as its baseline mode of operation, not occasionally, not only when under particular stress. The exhaustion, the distraction, the reactivity, these are the predictable result of a mind left to its own untrained momentum. What the scattered mind costs us is rarely spoken about directly. We speak about stress and burnout and overwhelm, but we rarely trace them back to their root, which is this: a mind that cannot be present for its own life. Think about what you are actually experiencing when the mind is scattered. You are in a conversation with someone you care about, and you are physically present. You are nodding, making eye contact, but you are not really there. You are half listening and half somewhere else, running some private calculation, and the person in front of you can feel it. There is a quality of distance in the exchange, a subtle absence, and afterwards you both feel it without quite being able to name it. Or consider eating a meal that someone took care to prepare, perhaps a meal you yourself cooked, and not tasting it. The food entering and exiting your awareness at approximately the same speed, outpaced entirely by thoughts that have nothing to do with the meal, nothing to do with the evening, nothing to do with where you actually are. Or the work that should feel meaningful, the kind of work that once lit something in you, being completed on a kind of autopilot, while the real attention is somewhere entirely else. The words get typed, the decisions get made, but there is nobody home to witness any of it. The scattered mind makes us less present. It also makes us less ourselves. When the mind is constantly moving, constantly pulled, constantly grabbed by the next thing before it has finished with the last, we lose access to our own depths. We become reactive. We say things we do not mean. We make choices we have not really examined. We arrive at the end of a day and wonder where it went. And the honest answer is that it went largely unwitnessed. And this is the deepest cost, the one that takes longest to name. A life lived from a scattered mind is not quite lived at all. The body shows up, the name appears on the right documents, but the actual texture of the experience, the color and warmth and specific gravity of each moment, passes through without landing. The old teachers had a phrase for this condition: sleeping through your own life. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and habitual, and almost nobody notices until one day they look back and find the record strangely thin. A life that was full by every outward measure, and somehow strangely unlived. Shantideva, an 8th century Buddhist master whose writings on the path remain essential reading for every serious practitioner, named this with surgical precision. The person whose mind is distracted, he wrote, lives between the fangs of the emotional afflictions. Every emotion that arises in an ungathered mind has the full run of the house. Anger arrives and takes over entirely. Anxiety arrives and spreads through every room. Craving arrives, and the next thing you know, you have said yes to something you did not want and spent money you did not have. There is nothing steady enough inside to hold these movements in awareness, to see them clearly, to choose a response rather than simply be swept along by them. You have felt the fangs. You know what it is to say something in a moment of reactivity that you did not choose to say, something that came from the scattered, ungathered mind, something you would not have said had you been a little more present, a little more steady. The fangs are the felt experience of being driven rather than driving, of responding from reflex rather than from wisdom, of living your life from the outside in rather than the inside out. Between every stimulus and every response, there is a gap. In the scattered mind, that gap is nearly invisible, so compressed that it might as well not exist. The stimulus arrives, the response fires, and before anything like reflection has had a chance to arise, the word has already been said, the action already taken. But this gap is not fixed. It can be widened. It can be cultivated deliberately, steadily, over time. And this widening, this expansion of the space between being triggered and acting, is one of the core gifts of what the tradition calls shamatha. Shamatha is a Pali and Sanskrit term, the meditative quality sometimes translated as calm abiding, translated more precisely as mental equilibrium. It refers to a mind that has been gathered, a mind that can rest in the present moment without being immediately swept away, that can hold an experience in awareness long enough to actually see it clearly. The tradition calls it the meditative state, not because it is exotic or inaccessible, but because it is the fundamental condition for all deeper contemplative work. When the instrument of the mind is steady, everything it touches becomes a little clearer, a little more available to you. And here is the understanding that changes everything. The Buddha taught, and this teaching appears in the oldest Buddhist texts, a thread that contemplatives have followed for century after century, that the mind in its natural state is luminous. Pabhasara citta, the luminous mind. The tradition is making a specific and radical claim here. The clarity you are reaching toward is already present at the core of your experience. The confusion, the reactivity, the restlessness, these are adventitious. Adventitious means arrived from outside. These conditions have settled on the mind the way dust settles on a lamp. They are real. They genuinely obscure, but they are guests who have overstayed, not the nature of the host. What this means for your practice is profound. The work ahead of you is the work of uncovering, not of construction. You are moving towards something that was never absent. You are clearing the surface of something that has always been there, waiting, patient, luminous beneath the accumulated weight of habit and conditioning and the relentless velocity of a scattered life. You have touched it. Listen for it as I describe it. The morning when you woke before the alarm and lay quietly for a few minutes before the day began, when for a moment the mind was simply there, clear and unhurried, present without agenda. The afternoon walk when the thinking stopped mid-stride, and in its place was just the sound of your footsteps, the quality of the light, the clean fact of being alive in a body on an ordinary afternoon. The conversation when you were so genuinely absorbed in what someone was telling you that the internal commentary fell entirely quiet, and you were just there, actually present, actually listening, actually in contact with another human being. What these moments share is a quality that is difficult to describe but unmistakable when it arrives. A sense of groundedness, of sufficiency, of the present moment being somehow enough. Nothing special is happening. No particular insight is occurring. And yet there is a rightness to the experience, a felt sense that this, right here, is what being alive actually feels like when you are fully in it. These are not special states requiring years of preparation. They are flashes of the natural mind, brief windows through which the luminosity the Buddha described becomes directly accessible to ordinary awareness. The difficulty is that we have not known how to enter them intentionally, or how to recognize and extend them when they appear naturally. That is precisely what this teaching addresses. The Tibetan teachers held a simile for this quality of mind that has stayed in the tradition for centuries. Imagine a butter lamp burning in a sheltered room. When the room is still, the flame burns with a steady, clear light, and by that light you can see everything around you with precision and ease. When the wind enters, the flame trembles, gutters, throws wild shadows on the walls. The light is still there. The flame has not gone out, but it has become unreliable. Nothing stays in focus long enough to be seen clearly. The practice of shamatha is the practice of sheltering the room. The flame was always there. The light was always present. The practice creates the conditions in which the flame can burn steadily, in which the natural clarity of the mind becomes reliable rather than occasional, available rather than accidental. This is why the tradition names shamatha the queen of all meditations. Every other practice, insight, compassion, the investigation of experience, depends entirely on the quality of the instrument through which it is practiced. A scattered mind attempting insight meditation will circle the same conclusions without ever penetrating them. A gathered mind can hold an object of investigation with the kind of steady, patient, unflinching attention from which genuine understanding actually emerges. Mental equilibrium does not replace the other practices. It is the ground in which they become genuinely effective, in which they do what they were always meant to do. And there is something more immediate than that long-term promise. A gathered mind simply feels better to inhabit. There is less friction in it, less of the grinding, effortful quality of a consciousness at war with its own contents. The exhaustion that many people mistake for a permanent feature of adult life turns out, on closer examination, to be largely the exhaustion of the scattered mind. The cost of running this much mental activity with this little coherence, this little rest. You will feel the difference within a single session. The feedback loop in shamatha practice is short and honest. When the mind gathers, even partially, even briefly, something changes in the quality of experience. You feel it in the body before the mind has had time to label it. A slackening of tension across the shoulders. A breath that goes a little deeper than it has all day. The sense of weight returning to the seat beneath you, as if you had been hovering slightly above your own life and have just now set down. A thought catches and you are off again, but the return becomes easier with each repetition, and what was brief becomes a little longer, and gradually the room begins to hold its stillness, even while the world outside continues its relentless pace. This is the territory we are entering. In the section that follows, we will meet the 5 obstacles that the tradition identified as the primary barriers to this gathering. The 5 winds that keep the flame from settling into its natural steadiness. Understanding each obstacle as the tradition understood it, with honesty and without judgment, is already half the path through it. The mind that can clearly see what is happening within itself has already begun the work of gathering itself home. The 5 winds have a face you have already seen today. Follow one ordinary day from its beginning. The alarm sounds. The eyes are barely open. The hand moves to the phone before the rest of you has arrived at the morning. Nothing particular is being looked for. There is no urgent notification, no event expected, no specific thing the phone holds that the night has been waiting to deliver. The hand moves anyway, reaches for the screen, the way the tongue reaches for something sweet before the mind has decided it wants sweetness. The feed loads. Something passes, then something else. The phone goes down. 30 seconds later, it comes up again. There is a feeling underneath this reaching, a mild dissatisfaction with what is actually here, a sense that something slightly more interesting might be available just slightly further along. The morning itself, the quality of light, the weight of the body still warm from sleep, the particular texture of this moment before the day has made any demands, goes largely unregistered. The mind is elsewhere before it has arrived. The body cooperates in this. Before the phone arrives, there is already a lean, a slight forward tilt in the attention, a readiness to receive something from outside rather than rest inside what is already here. This lean is so habitual it is no longer felt as a choice. It is simply the direction the morning moves in. Outward, always outward, before the eyes have fully opened. This is the first pattern, the reaching mind, always scanning for something a little more satisfying than what is actually here, always in a slight lean away from the present moment toward whatever might feel better than this. It moves through the day like a low-frequency static, barely audible, always present, quietly consuming the energy of attention before the day has properly begun. Mid-morning, a message arrives. A comment is made, a word chosen badly by someone who almost certainly did not think carefully about it. The sting lasts a second, maybe 2, and then the mind firms up around it. The moment is replayed. The word is examined from several angles. A response is drafted, precise, measured, landing exactly where it should, and discarded. Another is drafted. The grievance is refined. The original sting, which lasted perhaps 2 seconds, runs quietly through the next hour, like a thread pulled taut underneath everything else. The discomfort was real. The stiffening around it is something else entirely. The mind has encountered something it would rather not have encountered, and instead of allowing the encounter to be what it was, brief, minor, already finished, it has built a small infrastructure around it. Guards posted. Defenses prepared. The discomfort kept alive and attended to long past the moment it would naturally have passed. This pushing is exhausting in a way that is easy to miss because it does not feel like effort. It feels like care, like vigilance, like being appropriately serious about something that was done to you. But the body pays the cost regardless. The jaw slightly tighter, the shoulders a little higher than they need to be, The energy of the afternoon already partially spent on something the morning delivered, and the afternoon is still processing. This is the second pattern, the contracting mind, the one that stiffens against what it would rather not feel. What is resisted does not leave. It simply goes underground and continues its work from there, surfacing again and again in slightly different forms, all of them carrying the original sting. Early afternoon. After lunch. The work is there, important, requiring attention, waiting on the screen. The mind will not go to it. This is not tiredness exactly, or it is something that wears the clothes of tiredness without quite being it. A softening, a thickening of the air between the mind and whatever it is supposed to be doing. Thoughts arrive slowly, if at all. The screen blurs gently at the edges. There is an odd comfort in the fog, the way it keeps the sharpness of the afternoon at a pleasant remove. The way it requires nothing, offers a kind of effortless hovering between engagement and rest. 20 minutes pass. Perhaps more. The work is still waiting. The fog is still there. The mind has gone soft rather than go somewhere it would rather not go. This is the third pattern, the sinking mind. The mind that dims itself rather than be fully present. The tradition was careful to distinguish this from real tiredness, which is the body asking for what the body needs. This is something different. The mind withdrawing from the aliveness of the present moment into the comfort of a self-induced dullness, a voluntary fog that makes engagement feel optional. Evening. The work is finished. The reasonable time for worrying has passed. The mind does not stop. It returns to the message from this morning, reviews the response that was finally sent, calculates whether the tone was right, too direct, or not direct enough, moves to the conversation coming tomorrow and begins to rehearse it, arrives at a version that goes well, then at a version that does not, then at a version that goes so badly it has never actually happened and probably never will. The body is still. The shoulders are down. There is no external demand requiring this level of activity. The mind is pacing anyway, wearing a groove in the same small territory it has been crossing all day, returning again and again to the same unresolved questions as though this time, with enough repetition, they might finally settle. This is the fourth pattern, the restless mind, the chronic watchman who will not stand down even when nothing requires watching. The world trains this quality carefully. Stay alert, stay ready, treat stillness as a risk you cannot quite afford. And so even when the day is done and the body is quiet, the vigilance continues, a low hum of readiness for something that is not, and may never be, coming. Later, the house is quiet. An attempt to sit for a few minutes before the night closes in, to simply be still, to let the day settle, to do what the practice asks. Within a few breaths, the voice surfaces. What exactly is this achieving? People who find this useful seem to be a particular kind, calmer by nature, less complicated, less burdened by the specific weight of this particular life. Months of sitting and the same patterns still run. The same reaching in the morning, the same contracting at difficulty, The same fog, the same evening pacing. Perhaps this is simply the mind you have. Perhaps the practice is designed for someone different. The voice sounds reasonable, measured. It has the quality of honest self-assessment, of someone finally saying out loud what should have been obvious all along. This is the fifth pattern, and the most difficult to recognize as a pattern because it does not arrive as resistance. It arrives as clarity. The tradition called it doubt and placed it last among the five because it works most quietly. A slow leak that empties the practice of its energy before it has had the chance to show what it is capable of. These five patterns, the reaching, the contracting, the sinking, the pacing, the doubting, have been moving through human minds since long before they were given names. The Buddha walked through the same ordinary day. He had felt each of these textures himself and studied them with the same precision a physician brings to a pattern of symptoms seen many times over. He named them the 5 hindrances, not to give practitioners a typology to memorize, but to give them something that changes everything, the ability to recognize what they are standing inside before it has already taken the day. A hindrance named is a hindrance that has lost most of its force. The reaching mind that is not seen as reaching simply runs. The reaching mind that is recognized clearly in the moment it is reaching pauses. A small space opens, and in that space, a different quality becomes available. The naming does something subtle but real. When the reaching is recognized as reaching, not judged, not suppressed, simply seen, it loses the quality of being the whole atmosphere. A moment ago it was everything. Now it is a pattern, one of 5, known for centuries, familiar to every practitioner who has ever sat down with the intention of being still. This does not make it disappear. It changes your relationship with it completely. It is no longer the whether you are trapped inside. It is whether you can recognize, name, and begin to move through. The tradition mapped 5 such qualities, one responsive to each hindrance, arrived at through the same kind of direct observation that produced the map itself. Against the reaching mind, a practiced willingness to find this moment sufficient. Not exciting, not perfect, sufficient. The scan pauses. The morning, which was already here, becomes briefly visible. The old teachers were precise about what contentment means in this context. It is not the absence of preference. It is the temporary suspension of the scan, the deliberate pausing of the reach outward long enough to feel the quality of what is actually here. The light, the temperature of the room, the sound of the morning before anyone has asked anything of it. Not exciting. Present, which is, the practice suggests, already enough. Against the contracting mind, a basic non-hardening, meeting what arrives without immediately declaring it an enemy. The sting was real. The infrastructure built around it was optional. A little less construction, a little more space for the thing to simply be what it was and then pass. Against the sinking mind, a gentle turning of curiosity toward what is actually here. the warmth in the hands, the sound present in the room, the breath arriving and leaving. These simple facts are always more alive than the fog wants you to believe, and real interest in any one of them is enough to begin lifting the dullness. Against the pacing mind, permission. A deliberate message sent to the body. Nothing is required of you right now. The watchman can stand down. The world will still be there. These few minutes of stillness are not a risk. They are a condition. The tradition was clear that this is not passivity. The watchman standing down is not abandoning responsibility. It is recognizing that the vigilance which has been running since morning is consuming a resource the mind needs for something more important. The capacity to be here, clearly, without the low hum of readiness distorting everything it touches. A few minutes of actual rest changes the quality of everything that follows. Against the doubting mind, a quiet trust in what has already been touched, a small leaning toward the evidence of what the practice has already, even on difficult days, delivered. None of these are achieved once and kept. They are returned to, again and again, across ordinary days exactly like this one. But each time one of the 5 patterns is seen for what it is, a little more of the day remains available. A little more of the present moment is actually inhabited rather than fled from, muted, or endlessly rehearsed. These are the conditions that make stillness possible. They are not exotic. They are available in some measure right now. In the morning before the phone is reached for, in the pause before the stiffening, in the moment the fog is noticed rather than surrendered to, in the few minutes given to the watchman as permission to rest. The flame has conditions it needs in order to settle, and those conditions are not distant. They are already present, in some measure, in the texture of a day you already recognize. The map is already in your hands now. That is where the practice begins to ask something more specific of the body, and the first thing it asks is the one thing most people have been told to skip. Something releases. You notice it in the jaw first. A small letting go that happens almost before you have decided to let go. Then the shoulders. Then somewhere behind the eyes. A slackening that moves through the body in quiet waves. The way tension actually leaves when it is no longer being held in place by effort. This is where shamatha begins. In the body, before the mind has done anything deliberate at all. Most people approach meditation the wrong way around. They sit down and immediately set about trying to be calm. They work at it. They concentrate. They watch the mind with a kind of vigilant intensity, as if stillness was something that could be tracked down and pinned in place. And what happens is entirely predictable. The effort itself creates more noise. The mind that is being gripped cannot settle. The breath that is being controlled cannot deepen. The practice becomes a kind of performance of calm rather than the actual thing. And after 30 minutes of effortful, not thinking, the practitioner is more tense than when they began. The effort is real. The direction is simply wrong. The tradition understood this from the beginning. The very first instruction in formal shamatha practice has nothing to do with concentration or focus or the control of thought. It concerns relaxation. Deliberate, thorough, unhurried relaxation, offered to the body first, so that the mind can follow the body's example. The old teachers placed this instruction at the foundation and held it there. It is the central act of practice, the floor on which everything else rests. Remove it, and the whole structure tilts. Think of it this way. You have probably had the experience of lying somewhere quiet, or walking somewhere without a destination, and finding that a solution arrived that hours of effortful thinking had failed to produce. The mind, given the space that effort had been occupying, found what it had been too busy to locate. Stillness operates through the same principle. What cannot be reached by pushing is discovered naturally when the pushing stops. The clarity is already here. Relaxation is simply how we stop adding to what obscures it. What the tradition means by relaxation is precise. It does not mean slumping. It does not mean the heavy, foggy withdrawal that the second hindrance describes, the mind sinking into dullness to escape the effort of being present. The relaxation the tradition recommends is an active quality, the intentional release of unnecessary holding, layer by layer, until what remains is a body that is upright and easy, and an awareness that is open and undefended. The Tibetan teachers describe this quality with a phrase that translates roughly as loose and spacious, not tight, not braced for impact, spacious in the way a hand is spacious when it opens, released from effort without losing its shape, resting in its own natural openness. Let's work with this directly. Wherever you are as you listen, sitting, lying down, in whatever posture this moment has found you, bring attention to the face. The face holds an extraordinary amount of habitual tension. The muscles around the eyes, the muscles of the forehead, the jaw. In many people, these have been lightly clenched since childhood, so consistently that the clenching has stopped registering as tension and become simply the background hum of being in a face. See if that holding can soften. The eyes can be a little less focused, the forehead a little less drawn. The jaw can drop just slightly, and in that small drop, you may notice a release that travels further than expected, down the throat, down into the chest, all the way to the belly. The face and the jaw are the front line of the body's tension, but the shoulders carry its history. The shoulders hold the architecture of responsibility, years of bracing, of readying, of carrying what needs to be carried and preparing for what might still need to be carried after that. In most bodies, the shoulders have risen slightly over time, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters toward the ears, and this small upward creep has become so habitual that it no longer registers. It is simply what it feels like to exist in this body. Allow them to drop. Simply let them find their natural resting place, which is lower than where they likely are right now. Now the hands, the chest, the belly, which in the anxious body is often held slightly contracted, as if braced against something that has not arrived yet. Each of these areas carries tension as a habit, a residue of the day or the week or the long accumulation of years spent in a world that rewards readiness and treats rest with mild suspicion. There is no need to force anything open. The body relaxes when it receives permission, and permission is simply the quality of kind attention turned toward what has been holding without rest for a very long time. You are not making the body do something new. You are allowing the body to remember something it already knows. There is a quality of intelligence in the body that the analytical mind frequently overrides. The body knows how to breathe, how to rest, how to soften when the emergency has passed, if given the conditions to do so. Modern life rarely provides those conditions. We eat while working, sleep while worrying, rest while already planning the next thing. The body almost never receives the unambiguous signal it needs. There is nothing required of you right now. You can actually stop. Sitting in deliberate relaxation is the practice of giving that signal clearly, without qualification, for perhaps the first time in the whole of a long day. The tradition was precise about why the body must come first. The mind does not lead in shamatha practice. The body leads, and the mind follows. This is because the mind and body share a single nervous system, and the nervous system responds to physical signals before it responds to mental instructions. You cannot think your way into stillness. The instruction to relax, issued from the mind to itself, produces almost nothing. A slow breath, a released jaw, a deliberate lowering of the shoulders. These speak directly to the system that regulates the body's state, and that system, receiving the signal that nothing dangerous is happening, begins to ease. The mind takes the hint. The grip loosens. The vigilance that has been running all day simply has nothing left to guard against. Notice now what happens to the breath. When the body is braced, the breath is short and high, confined to the upper chest, quick and shallow, never quite completing itself. This is the breath of readiness, the breath of a body that expects to need to move. As the body relaxes, the breath changes without being asked to. It drops lower. It slows. The out-breath lengthens past the in-breath, and in that lengthening, something shifts in the body's whole orientation. A signal sent from the lungs to the nervous system. There is no emergency. We can rest now. Let the pace change. There is a second layer of relaxation that the tradition valued just as highly as the first. It is the relaxation of inner speech. The mind carries a constant running commentary, a narrator who evaluates, plans, worries, rehearses, and describes, rarely pausing, rarely silent. In the early stages of sitting, this narrator is the main noise. It is the voice you hear when you close your eyes, and the quiet reveals everything that has been running underneath the day. As the body softens and the breath deepens, this commentary begins to slow on its own. The sentences shorten. The spaces between thoughts widen. Trying to silence the voice is itself a form of effort. Another grip. Another way of treating the mind as something that needs to be managed rather than simply met. You bring attention to the body and the breath, and the commentary, finding less energy to feed on, gradually loses momentum. The gaps between thoughts lengthen. The narrator grows quiet for a moment, then longer still. And in those gaps, something becomes perceptible that the commentary was covering. A quality of quiet that that was always underneath the noise, waiting for it to thin. Ajahn Chah, one of the great Thai forest teachers of the last century, described the mind in practice with an image that has stayed in the tradition because it is exact. He spoke of a forest pool. When the pool is undisturbed, its surface is perfectly still, and in that stillness, it reflects the forest around it with complete clarity. Every leaf, every branch, every movement of light through the canopy above. Nothing distorted, nothing missed. Disturb the surface. Drop a stone, stir the water, and the reflections shatter. The forest is still there, entirely unchanged, and the pool can no longer show it. The still pool does not work at being still. It does not try to hold the reflections in place. It simply rests in its own nature, and clarity arrives as a consequence of that rest. This is precisely what relaxation means in the context of practice. The mind that has been allowed to settle can perceive with a clarity the effortful mind never reaches, because the effortful mind is always disturbing its own surface. The stillness reveals. The forest was always behind the shattered reflections. The luminous mind was always present behind the commentary. What relaxation removes is the obscuration, the accumulated noise of effort and worry, and the long habit of treating experience as something to be managed. The view was always there beyond the glass. The practice is the cleaning of the glass, and every moment of actual relaxation is one pass of the cloth across the surface. There is a quality of awareness available in a body that has truly relaxed, that is simply not accessible any other way. It is not dullness. It is not the foggy withdrawal of sloth and torpor. It is something closer to the alertness of a very still animal, fully present, fully attuned, sensitive to everything that moves, yet requiring no effort to maintain. The traditional teachers called this quality clear knowing, the awareness that becomes available when the noise settles, the perceiving that happens when the perceiver stops working so hard at perceiving. Many people encounter this quality for the first time in shamatha practice and are surprised by how ordinary it feels. They expected something unmistakable, a sudden brightness, a dramatic shift, a felt sense unmistakably unlike the ordinary mind. What arrives instead is a quality of simple, clean, unhurried presence that feels, paradoxically, deeply familiar, as though this were something known a long time ago and only recently forgotten, as though the unfamiliarity was the agitation, and this open, spacious, ungripped awareness is simply what has always been here underneath the noise. If you rest in this quality for even a moment, if you allow the recognition to simply be what it is, without rushing to describe it or confirm it or make sure it stays, you will find that it asks nothing of you. It is self-sustaining. It does not need to be created or maintained or carefully protected. It simply needs to be met with the same quiet attention that a forest pool receives when someone sits still enough on its bank to stop disturbing the water. Relaxation is the first act of trust in shamatha practice. Every time you allow the jaw to soften, every time the shoulders drop, every time you stop working at being calm, and simply permit the body to rest. You are practicing the most fundamental skill, the willingness to stop controlling and allow. The mind follows this willingness deeper than effort can take it. Effort works on the surface. Relaxation opens the depth. The mind that has spent years learning to grip can gradually learn that the deepest knowing requires an open hand, a willingness to receive what the relaxed body is already offering. The practice meets you here precisely, in this single small act of letting go. And from that depth, a question naturally surfaces. A relaxed and open awareness is ready to receive. But where does it place itself? What becomes the anchor for this open, unhurried attention? The tradition explored this question with great care, and what they found was not a single answer, but two distinct approaches, each suited to a different quality of mind, each pointing toward the same still water from a different bank of the same forest. From those two banks of the same forest, the tradition offers two complete and distinct ways of arriving at the same water. They have been practiced for centuries. Both are real paths, and in the hands of the teachers who understood them fully, both arrive at the same place, a mind that has learned to rest in itself without force and without falling. The first is sometimes called open awareness. The second is called single-pointed focus. These names can make them sound like opposites, one broad and the other narrow, one spacious and the other precise. That framing misses what they actually are. They are two different gestures toward the same quality of mind, two doors into the same room. Let the body continue resting as it already is, and simply listen. In open awareness, the instruction is to let the field of attention expand until it includes everything that is already present, without gripping any of it, without pushing any of it away, without deciding in advance what is important enough to notice and what can be allowed to pass unattended. Think of a bowl left open to the sky, large enough that whatever arrives can arrive. Rest for a moment, and then pass on without the bowl needing to chase it or mourn its leaving. The bowl does not work at its own openness. Its nature is already open. It simply rests in that nature and receives whatever comes. In practice, this means a sound arises. You hear it. You do not follow it, build a story around it, or decide what it means about the world or about you. You simply hear it and let it pass. A sensation appears in the body. The temperature of the air on your skin, a heaviness in the legs, a flicker of something you might call tiredness or might call release. You feel it. It moves. A thought arises. You notice it the way you notice the shape of a cloud, fully, without urgency, without needing it to be different from what it is. This is not passive. There is a quality of clear, steady attention running underneath the openness. The Tibetan teachers described it as awareness that is both vast and precise at the same time. The way a great mirror is not less accurate for being large. The mind is awake. It simply is no longer arranging everything it meets into a story about itself. Open awareness tends to serve the mind that arrives agitated. The mind that has been working hard all day, carrying a tension it cannot quite identify, moving from task to task without a gap between them. When that mind is asked to narrow down and concentrate on a single small thing, the instruction can feel like tightening a lid on something already under pressure. The agitation resists the narrowing and produces more agitation as a result. Open awareness removes that instruction entirely. It says, "You do not have to manage what is here. You do not have to organize it or improve it. Simply let it all be present, the way weather is present in the sky, arriving and departing of its own accord, requiring nothing from you except the willingness to let it pass." If you allow this approach even briefly, you may notice a quality of spaciousness that was already present but invisible beneath the pressure of attention trained to seek a single object. A sense that the mind is larger than its current contents, that there is room in this awareness for exactly what is here. The held breath releases, the hunched attention opens, and in that opening, something that was being crowded out by effort begins to breathe again. There is an almost physical quality to this. A practitioner who has been pushing their attention like a weight against a wall suddenly stops pushing and finds the wall was never entirely solid. The resistance was in the pushing. The openness was always there, waiting behind the effort. What dissolves is the effort itself, and in its absence, a quality of alert, spacious awareness surfaces that no amount of effortful concentrating could have produced. The second approach moves differently. Here, you choose one thing to rest your attention on, something simple, something already present. Almost always, for those coming to this approach for the first time, the teachers recommend the breath, not because it is the only valid object, but because it is the one anchor you always carry with you, the one that is never more than a moment away, the one that does not ask you to create anything that was not already there. You bring your attention to the breath. You follow the sensation of breathing, the slight coolness of the air entering the nostrils, the small rise and fall of the chest or belly, the subtle shift in the body's weight with each cycle of in and out. You stay with this as long as you can. Then the mind wanders. Of course it wanders. This is what minds do. And when you notice it has wandered, even if you notice this a full minute later, even if the thought was elaborate and gripping and felt completely urgent, you simply bring the attention back, gently, without scolding, the way you might redirect a young child who has simply forgotten where they were going. Most people expect this practice to consist of staying. They believe that a good sitting is one in which the attention never leaves the breath, and that each time it drifts it is evidence of some inadequacy. A mind too restless, a practitioner too undisciplined, a session that has somehow failed. The teachers were clear. The practice consists of returning. The wandering is the raw material. Each return is a small act of waking up, a moment in which the mind that was absent becomes present again, clearly, without drama, without self-recrimination. That moment of noticing, the brief, clean flash of recognition between the thought and the return, is the practice itself. Awareness recognizing itself. the mind seeing that it has been elsewhere and choosing, simply and without ceremony, to be here instead. That choice, made 100 times in a single sitting, is the repetition that builds something real. Over time, something shifts in the quality of the sitting. The returns come faster. The gaps between wandering and noticing shorten. This is not the result of gripping the attention more tightly. Tighter gripping produces tension, and tension is what this practice is releasing, not accumulating. Something subtler is happening. The mind gradually discovers that resting with the breath is simply more pleasant than following the trains of thought that move through it. The stillness begins to feel like home rather than like discipline. The returning becomes less effortful the more clearly the mind recognizes what it is returning to. Single-pointed practice tends to serve the mind that arrives drifting. The mind that is scattered rather than agitated, foggy, slightly numb, unable to hold a thread for more than a moment before it dissolves into something else. This mind needs a center to organize around, an anchor in the current, something it can find again after each loss. The breath offers exactly this, a reliable and simple home base, always present, never demanding, never disappointed when you arrive late. The question that arises is reasonable. If both approaches arrive at the same place, how do you know which one to enter from tonight? The answer the tradition offers is also simple. Read the quality of the mind you are sitting down with. Take a moment now. Set aside what you hope to cultivate or what the practice is supposed to produce. What is actually present in this mind right now, before any technique has been applied? Is there a quality of restlessness, a buzzing, a tightness, a sense that the mind is moving quickly between things and does not want to stop? Open awareness tends to be the more useful door. Let the field widen. Let attention rest in the whole of what is here, without preference, without selection. Is there a quality of drifting, a diffuse fogginess, a sense that the mind keeps slipping away from wherever you place it, that thoughts arrive without urgency and dissolve without resolution? Single-pointed focus tends to be the more useful door. Give the mind a thread to follow, one small, reliable, endlessly available anchor. Let the returning be the whole practice. There is no hierarchy between these two approaches. The tradition did not reserve one for experienced practitioners and assign the other to beginners. They are tools, and a wise practitioner learns to use both, reaching for each with precision, the way a craftsperson knows their tools well enough to match the right one to the material without deliberating. The quality of tonight's mind determines tonight's approach. Tomorrow night may call for something different. The practice becomes responsive rather than mechanical. And there is something valuable in this responsiveness. When you begin each sitting by reading the mind rather than applying a pre-decided method, you are already practicing the core skill of shamatha, clear, honest attention to what is actually present. The choice of approach is itself a moment of practice, a moment of seeing the mind as it is, before the more structured work begins. Nothing is wasted in that seeing. Even the pause before the practice is practice. The tradition recognized this kind of honest reading as a small, valuable act of awareness in itself, a first seeing before the more formal practice begins. You will also find that some evenings the two approaches overlap. You begin with open awareness, and something in the mind naturally gathers around a single still point within the openness, a small center of quiet that the wide field discovers on its own. Or you begin with the breath, and the attention gradually relaxes outward into a field that no longer has a boundary, a wide, unhurried awareness of which the breath has become only one feature among many. This is the two approaches demonstrating what has always been true about them. At depth, they are one thing. What the tradition noticed across centuries of careful observation is that deep practice in either approach begins to resemble the other. In open awareness, as the practice settles, the wide field of attention develops a still point at its center. The openness does not make the mind vague or scattered. It becomes precise in a particular way, aware of everything simultaneously, caught by nothing, disturbed by nothing, still in the way that a deep lake is still even as its surface continues to receive whatever the sky sends it. In single-pointed practice, as the attention grows finer and more settled, the close and patient watching of one thing gradually reveals the space that holds it. You attend to the breath so patiently, so gently, that you begin to notice the breath itself and the quiet field in which it moves. The awareness that is present before the breath arrives and still there after it has gone. At a certain depth, the two approaches become indistinguishable from each other. The practitioner of open awareness has found a still point at the heart of the vastness. The practitioner of single-pointed focus has found a vastness at the heart of the still point. They have arrived in the same place, through different doors, and what they find there has no edges. Only the quality of awareness resting in itself, open, clear, and quietly awake. This is worth sitting with. The tradition is not describing two practices that merely lead to similar outcomes. It is saying that the openness and the stillness were always the same thing, that the practitioner who opened wide and the practitioner who narrowed down were always approaching the same quality of mind from two different angles, like two climbers on opposite faces of the same mountain, each following their own line upward, each arriving at the same place above the cloud line, where the air is clear and the view is the same in every direction. The tradition spent a great deal of care examining what objects might be carried through either of these doors, what specific things a practitioner might choose to bring their attention to rest upon, and why the choice matters. Because what the teachers discovered is that the objects of practice carry more weight than their function alone suggests. They are invitations into specific qualities of awareness. Different objects call out different aspects of what the mind most naturally is. And among all the objects the tradition has mapped and tested across the centuries, there is one that holds a particular place, because of what begins to open in you the moment you truly begin to listen to it. For centuries, the teachers did not leave practitioners with two doors and no guidance about what to carry through them. They mapped the terrain on the other side with extraordinary care. They catalogued the objects that a settled mind can rest upon, 40 of them in the tradition's most systematic accounting, each suited to a different kind of mind, each capable of calling out something specific in the practitioner who works with it over time. The list reads less like a curriculum than like a pharmacopoeia. Remedies for specific conditions, matched to specific temperaments, refined through observation across generations of careful, patient practice. Most people arriving at meditation in the contemporary world have been handed a single instruction from this vast map. Watch the breath. The breath is where most serious practitioners eventually settle, and for good reason. But the teachers did not begin with the breath. They began with a question. What quality of mind does this practitioner most need to cultivate right now? And they selected the object accordingly. Understanding why the breath ultimately occupies the center of the map requires first understanding what surrounds it. The other objects, what they offer, and what each one reveals about the nature of attention itself. Sound arrives without being invited. It crosses the boundary of the body without asking permission, entering through the ears whether or not the practitioner is ready to receive it. This involuntary quality is precisely what makes it valuable as a meditation object for a certain kind of struggling mind. The practitioner who has been fighting with the breath, who finds the instruction to watch the breath, produces a kind of anxious vigilance, a tightening rather than a settling, often discovers immediate relief when sound becomes the anchor instead. The ears receive, they do not reach, and this difference matters more than it might seem. A great deal of what makes sitting difficult is the reaching quality of effortful attention, the sense of straining toward an object, of trying to hold a thread that keeps slipping, of working hard at something that is supposed to be restful. Sound bypasses this entirely. The practitioner who allows sound to be the object discovers that the object comes to them. The mind does not need to go anywhere. It simply stays where it is and receives what arrives. With practice, the listening deepens past the labeling of sounds. Early in the sitting, the mind will identify traffic, a door closing somewhere, rain against a window. With time, the labels fall away and what remains is pure vibration. The physical fact of sound before the mind has decided what to call it. Attending to sound at this level produces a quality of open, receptive alertness that has no agenda and no preference. Sounds arise and dissolve without the practitioner needing to hold them or mourn their leaving. And in the silence between sounds, in those intervals of absence, something becomes apparent that is easy to overlook. Awareness does not disappear when the object disappears. The knowing is still there, clear and awake, in the silence as much as in the sound. This discovery, that awareness persists through the absence of objects, that the knowing is not dependent on having something to know, is one the tradition considered foundational. Most practitioners assume that, without something to attend to, attention simply collapses. The silence between sounds tests this assumption directly. The silence is audible, in its way, a texture that is different from sound, a quality of space that has its own character, its own depth, and the practitioner who rests in that silence without rushing to fill it discovers something the sound itself was pointing toward all along. Among the tradition's objects are what the teachers called the divine qualities, specific emotional tones that can be cultivated until they become stable enough to serve as anchors. The most practiced of these is the quality of loving kindness, metta in Pali, the sense of basic goodwill toward existence that is present in the mind at its most natural and least defended. Using metta as a meditation object is different from any of the other approaches covered so far. It does not ask the mind to observe something neutral. It asks the mind to inhabit something warm. The instruction is to bring to mind someone you love without effort, a close friend, a child, perhaps an animal, and then attend very carefully to what arises in the body when that person is present in the mind. The object is the felt quality in the chest that the thought of them produces. That warmth, that involuntary softening, available to attention as concretely as the weight of the body or the temperature of the air. You rest in it, return to it when the mind wanders, and gradually extend it in the traditional way, outward from those you love easily to those you know less well, and then to those for whom warmth does not come naturally. What metta calls out is the mind's natural warmth, a quality that is always present but rarely attended to, drowned out most of the time by the more urgent frequencies of worry and planning. The practitioner who has spent a long time in contracted or defended states often finds that this object is the one that thaws something frozen in the practice. The warmth of real goodwill cannot be forced. The harder a person pushes at it, the more it contracts. It arises only when the conditions are right. When something has been allowed to soften, when the guarding has relaxed enough for warmth to surface on its own. Practicing with metta as the object teaches a form of non-interference that is difficult to learn from neutral objects alone. The breath can be attended to grimly, with a clenched focus that produces results of a kind. Metta cannot. It yields only to a certain quality of gentle attention, and the practitioner who learns to offer that attention to the heart learns something essential about how the whole practice works. The practitioner who has spent months trying to achieve stillness by force and found the practice exhausting often discovers, when they turn toward metta, that something immediately releases. The sitting that had been a discipline becomes something closer to a rest. The same practice, now with warmth running through it. The field of physical sensation offers a third kind of anchor. The tradition here points not to specific parts of the body, but to the overall texture of being in a body at this particular moment. The weight of the sitting posture, the contact of the hands resting in the lap, the small, continuous data of temperature and pressure, and the faint pulse that makes itself known in the palms, the temples, the hollow of the throat. This object grounds the mind that tends to live too far upward, the mind that runs almost entirely in the register of thought and concept and narrative, and relates to the body primarily as a system that requires maintenance. For this kind of mind, sensation is almost startling in its solidity. The body has been here the entire time, through every crisis, every achievement, every ordinary afternoon, carrying its own weight and its own warmth, complete and present, older than every abstraction the mind has ever constructed around it. To attend to it with care is to discover a kind of companionship that has been there all along, unasked for and reliable. The sensation object also teaches endurance of a particular kind. The body, attended to carefully, is never entirely still or entirely comfortable. There is always some small signal, a tightness, an itch, the faint ache of a held position, and the practitioner's relationship to these minor discomforts, whether they respond with aversion or simply acknowledge and continue, reveals a great deal about how they meet the minor discomforts of daily life. The practice of staying with sensation is, in a quiet way, the practice of equanimity. Each of these objects is real. Each has guided practitioners towards stillness for a very long time. Sound cultivates receptivity. Metta cultivates warmth and openness. Sensation cultivates groundedness. All of them have their place in the map. And yet the tradition returns, always, to the breath as the most widely recommended anchor, the one the teachers placed at the center and held there across centuries and traditions and schools of practice. The question is why? The breath is alive. This sounds obvious until you sit with it long enough to understand what it means. A sound is indifferent to the practitioner's state. It arrives and behaves as it will, regardless of what is happening inside the one who hears it. The breath is the opposite of this. The breath is a living signal, a continuous record, written in the language of the body, of precisely what the nervous system is experiencing at this moment. A shallow, high, tight breath says, something is contracted. A long, low, slow breath says, something has released. The breath tells the truth about the mind's condition in real time, accurately and without editorializing, in a language available to anyone willing to listen carefully enough to hear it. This is the first thing the breath teaches, not how to be still, but how to read the present moment. The practitioner who sits with the breath over time develops a kind of literacy in their own experience, the ability to know, without introspection, without analysis, simply by attending to the quality of a single inhalation, exactly what is happening in the system right now. Emotion registers in the breath before the mind has found words for it. Fear tightens the breath. Grief weights it. Joy opens it. The practitioner who has learned to attend to the breath closely enough begins to know what they are feeling before the conceptual mind has labeled it, which is an unusual form of self-knowledge and a surprisingly useful one. The second thing the breath offers is something no other object provides in quite the same way: the natural pause. Between each out-breath and the next in-breath, there is a moment, very brief, very subtle, in which the lungs are empty and the body has not yet asked for more. The breath has completed itself and not yet begun again. In this pause, the mind that has learned to follow the breath closely will find a pocket of stillness that belongs entirely to the body's own rhythm. It was not produced by effort. It was not manufactured by technique. It simply arrived, as it has been arriving since the first breath taken at birth, in every quiet moment the body has ever passed through. The tradition placed great value on this pause, describing it as a natural resting place in the middle of movement, a stillness the practice did not need to create, only learn to recognize. The third thing the breath offers is trust. The breath has continued without the practitioner's supervision for every year of their life. It continued through sleep, through illness, through every night of worry that felt impossible to survive. It has never asked to be helped. It has never been uncertain what to do next. Placing attention with the breath, particularly for practitioners who have spent years in a tightly managed relationship with their own experience, is an act of putting down a weight that was never theirs to carry. The breath is already doing precisely what it needs to do. The practice is to attend to it carefully enough to notice how much it already knows, how long it has been reliable, how little it has ever required of you beyond the basic willingness to let it continue. Practitioners often report that this quality of the breath, its absolute reliability, its indifference to whether it is being attended to, produces a kind of comfort they did not anticipate. To rest attention on something that has never needed managing is to discover how much managing one has been doing. How much of what passes for ordinary awareness is actually anxious supervision, checking, confirming that things are proceeding as they should. The breath simply continues. And in the settling of attention on something so consistently itself, the habit of supervision gradually loosens its grip. This quiet shift is among the lasting gifts of breath practice. As practice deepens, the relationship with the breath shifts. What was an anchor becomes a companion. The practitioner who has returned to the same breath with the same careful attention night after night begins to notice qualities that were always present but too subtle to detect before the mind had learned to be this quiet. The particular texture of the in-breath on a cold evening, the way a long exhalation produces a brief, clean emptiness in the body, the way the pause at the bottom of the breath can extend, just slightly, when the mind is truly at rest, widening into a stillness that the breath itself seems to offer, rather than one the practitioner has worked to achieve. The breath knows something. The mind that learns to follow it patiently discovers that it has been following a guide all along, and that the guide has known the way far longer than the practice has been underway. The breath does not announce itself as a teacher. It simply continues, as it has for every year of the practitioner's life, as it will for every year that follows. Unremarkable in its regularity, steady in its patience, asking nothing and offering everything to the one who has finally learned to pay attention. Most practitioners begin their relationship with the breath the same way. They sit down, they remember the instruction, and they turn their attention toward the sensation of breathing with a kind of dutifulness. The way one turns toward a task known to be worthwhile but not yet interesting. The breath is there. They attend to it. It does what it does. They attend some more. This is the practice in its early form, and it is entirely adequate as a beginning. What the practitioners who continue discover is that the breath gradually becomes interesting, deeply interesting, in the way that any subject becomes deeply interesting when you have given it sustained attention long enough to begin seeing past its surface. The breath is not one thing. It is an event that changes texture from moment to moment, from cycle to cycle, from sitting to sitting. A practitioner who has been at this long enough can feel the difference between a breath taken in the middle of agitation and a breath taken after 20 minutes of settled attention. They are not the same event. They feel entirely different in the body. Different in quality, different in depth, different in what they reveal about the state of the mind producing them. In the early stages of a sitting, the breath is typically uneven. Short here, longer there, carrying the irregular rhythm of a mind that has not yet stopped moving. The practitioner follows it as best they can, returning when the mind wanders, finding it again, settling briefly, losing it, returning. This phase can persist for many minutes, and it is worth understanding it accurately. The returning is the practice, and each returning deposits something. A small weight of familiarity, a slight deepening of the groove between the mind and its anchor. There is a particular quality to this accumulation that the tradition noticed. The returning is never exactly the same twice. Each one deposits a different nuance of familiarity, a different texture of what this breath in this body on this evening actually feels like. And gradually, over many sittings, the breath stops feeling like a foreign instruction and starts feeling like something already known. Something so continuous and so close that the wonder is only that it was ever overlooked. The practice did not create this. It trained the attention to notice what was already so entirely present it had become invisible. After some time, how long varies between sittings and between practitioners. Something shifts in the texture of the breath. The unevenness smooths. The breath finds a rhythm that can be followed without the kind of deliberate effort the early stages required. The relationship has settled into something that feels almost companionable. The breath is doing what it does. The attention is doing what it does. And for a stretch of cycles, the two are simply moving together, neither pulling at the other, neither requiring anything the other is not already providing. The old teachers gave careful descriptions of what becomes available when sustained attention and the breath settle into this kind of accord. They noted that the quality of attention changes first, from deliberate vigilance to something that operates more lightly, more fluidly, the way a practiced musician follows a melody they know well, without consciously tracking each note. The breath has become familiar territory. The attention relaxes into the knowing rather than reaching for it. This is qualitatively different from the reaching of the early stage. And once a practitioner has felt the difference, they recognize it immediately when it returns. What follows from this settling is something many practitioners do not anticipate the first time they encounter it. A quality of ease in the body that is distinct from ordinary relaxation. Ordinary relaxation is the absence of tension. What arises in settled concentration is something more active than that. A kind of aliveness. A pleasant current that seems to come from the practice itself rather than from any external cause. The body begins to feel rewarded. The sitting, which in the early stages was largely an exercise in patience, begins to offer something the practitioner finds themselves wanting to return to. The tradition named this quality carefully, describing it as a sense of joy or rapture that arises in the body when attention and the breath have found each other fully, and the system stops bracing against the possibility of interruption. This ease is felt in the body rather than merely understood by the mind. It tends to begin in the chest, a softening that is different from the deliberate release of the early sitting because it arises on its own, without instruction. It moves through the shoulders, the hands. Some practitioners notice it as warmth, some as a subtle brightness, as though the body had become slightly more permeable, more in contact with the air around it. The descriptions vary, but the underlying quality is consistent. The body, given the conditions of settled concentration, responds as though it is receiving something it has long needed. This quality deepens as the concentration deepens. It is accompanied by a second quality the teachers described with equal care, a sense of contentment that settles into the sitting without needing to be created, a sense that nothing needs to happen outside of this, that the moment is precisely what it is, and the mind is at home in it. The breath and this ease become almost inseparable. The breath carrying the ease forward, the ease deepening the breath, both of them feeding a quality of settled attention that is now self-sustaining in a way it was not an hour ago. Some practitioners, at this depth, notice what the tradition described with particular care. A quality of inner brightness that has no external source. Steady, unhurried, entirely unlike the busy activity of a distracted mind. The old teachers called this a sign of the meditation, an indication that the mind has settled far enough for its own natural clarity to surface. They instructed practitioners to rest with it without examining it too closely or reaching for it too eagerly, because the reaching disrupts precisely what the resting was producing. Return to the breath. Allow the two to coexist. The brightness and the breath are pointing at the same thing. As concentration deepens further, the breath changes in a way that surprises many practitioners the first time they experience it. It becomes fine, subtle. The movements that were earlier clearly perceptible, the rise of the chest, the coolness at the nostrils, the small shift in the belly, grow quiet. The body continues to breathe. The breath moves through it steadily. The signal it sends to the attending mind becomes smaller, softer, more delicate. Where the early breath was a broad current, easy to locate, the concentrated breath is a thread, thin, precise, requiring a quality of attention that is itself finer than what the beginning required. Many practitioners find that following a very subtle breath requires a new relationship with effort. In the early stages, effort was what the practice was made of. At this finer level, that same effort becomes counterproductive. A breath this subtle cannot be followed by straining toward it. The straining disrupts the signal. What is required is receptivity rather than reach, a listening rather than a looking, a receiving rather than a pursuing. The fining of the breath is teaching the practitioner something the earlier work was preparing them for, that at depth, the practice is less about doing and more about allowing. This can feel alarming the first time. Practitioners often interpret the fining of the breath as evidence that something has gone wrong, that the body is not receiving enough air, that the practice has drifted from its proper course. The tradition was clear. The fining of the breath is not an error. It is a sign of deepening, of the nervous system settling into a state in which the body's metabolic needs have actually reduced, and the breath can afford to become more quiet. What is asked of the practitioner is simply a corresponding refinement, to follow the breath as it grows fine, meeting its new subtlety with a new subtlety in the attending. The mind that learns to follow a breath this subtle has learned something that no early stage practice can teach. What precision of attention actually feels like from the inside. The easy precision of a hand so familiar with what it holds that it can sense every small change without tightening. This quality of precise ease is available only at depth, and the breath, growing finer as the practice settles, is what leads the practitioner there. Something else happens as the breath becomes fine. Thought slows. The relationship between breath and thought is more intimate than most practitioners realize until they have sat long enough to feel it directly. When the breath is uneven and busy, thought tends to be uneven and busy. When the breath settles, thought settles too. When the breath becomes very quiet, thought becomes very quiet. They are not independent systems running alongside each other. They are aspects of a single process, and attending carefully to one turns out to be attending carefully to the other. The quieting of thought is not the absence of thought. Thoughts still arrive, but they arrive the way leaves fall on a lake that has grown very still, appearing briefly, settling, dissolving without leaving a wake. They carry less urgency than they did an hour ago. They do not generate the ripples they generate in a busy mind. And in the intervals between them, intervals that grow longer as the concentration deepens, something becomes apparent that was always present but invisible through the noise. Awareness itself, steady and clear, entirely undisturbed by the movements that pass through it. What arises in these intervals is not emptiness in the ordinary sense, not blankness, not the absence of experience. The practitioner who has followed the breath into this quiet discovers that awareness has a texture of its own, independent of its contents. A quality of presence that is intrinsically clear, intrinsically awake, and which seems to have been there the entire time, running beneath every thought and sensation the practitioner has ever had. This is not a state created by the practice. It was simply uncovered. The tradition described this quality as the mind's natural luminosity, a clarity that has always been present, quietly waiting beneath every distraction the day has placed in front of it. The practitioner who reaches this depth finds what the tradition described with great consistency across all its schools and lineages: the mind resting in itself. The breath is very subtle. Thought is very quiet. The body is easy. What remains is awareness, not directed at any particular object, not maintained by effort, simply present in the way that a clear sky is present, as the condition in which everything else appears. This is the place the breath was always leading. Every patient returning, every quiet cycle of following the in-breath and the out-breath, every moment of noticing and continuing, all of it was moving in this direction. The destination was never remote. The breath was never building the path. It was pointing toward what was already here, present in the same way it was present before the practice began, before the first sitting, before the first instruction was ever given. What the tradition noticed is that this quality of clear, rested awareness does not feel new when the practitioner first arrives at it. It feels recovered, like a room in the mind that was always there, just behind the noise, waiting for the noise to thin enough to be crossed. The first time a practitioner settles fully here, they will often feel, yes, this quality, so ordinary, so quiet, so simply itself, is what all the returning was in the service of. The tradition did not leave this territory undescribed. Having traced the practice from the first uneven breath to this quality of open, self-sustaining stillness, the teachers turn their attention to what such a mind becomes capable of, the specific qualities that become available to the practitioner who has established this kind of ground, and what those qualities make possible when the sitting ends and the ordinary world returns. What arrives at depth is not only quietness, it is a different quality of perception, one the tradition considered among the most transformative things the practice has to offer, and the most likely to change the relationship with everything else. To hear what this quality actually is, it helps to follow someone all the way through it. Picture an evening, not a peaceful one. The week has been difficult in the way that weeks sometimes are, through the accumulation of smaller things, each one manageable in itself, all of them together leaving the body carrying something it cannot quite name. You sit down to practice. The body finds its position. The eyes close. And immediately, before the first breath can be followed to its end, the mind is somewhere else entirely. It is in the conversation from this morning, the one that ended without resolution. It is replaying the moment where something should have been said differently, trying the sentence again, finding a better version, then another. Then it is in tomorrow, in the meeting that has to go well, in the list of things that have to be ready before the meeting. Then it is somewhere older, in something that has been sitting unanswered for longer than the week. The breath is technically happening. You are technically practicing. The mind is elsewhere, and it knows it, and that knowing adds a small layer of frustration on top of everything else. The practice has not failed. This is exactly what the practice is for. You return to the breath. The mind goes somewhere again. You return. It goes again. You return again. There is no drama in this. Or there is a little drama, but you return anyway. The returning is the whole practice. The returning is the deposit being made, quietly, incrementally, in the willingness of the mind to come back to where it is. After some time, something begins to change in the quality of the sitting. The mind still moves. The thoughts are still there. The conversation from this morning is still available if the mind reaches for it. Something is different in the relationship between you and the movement. The thoughts are still arriving, but they are arriving to something that has found a kind of ground, a settledness, a weight that was not there at the start of the sitting. You are still here. Here in the breath, here in the body, here in this room, in this particular quality of evening behind the closed eyes. The mind has not gone still the way a stone goes still. It has found something closer to the stillness of a deep river, where the surface still moves, where the current is still present, but where the water beneath has a weight the surface cannot disturb. The tradition has a name for this: stability. The mind that has learned to stay, through return after return, until the present moment has become safe to rest in. Then something else happens. Into the sitting, into the quiet that is now here, even though the mind has not gone silent, something arrives. Something more specific than the general sense of difficulty that has been circling since the week began. A grief or a fear or the particular weight of something carried for long enough that the body has started to believe it is permanent. In other sittings, this is the moment everything unravels. The feeling arrives and the mind immediately wraps around it. The story about the feeling begins. The history of the feeling begins. The list of reasons for the feeling begins. And the breath is gone and the sitting is gone and you are somewhere else entirely. This time something is different. You feel the feeling arrive. You feel its weight move into the chest and into the shoulders and into that place behind the sternum where grief and fear tend to live. And there is a moment, a small one, where you are aware of it arriving before it has entirely arrived. A gap between the feeling and the story about the feeling. A space, barely a breath wide, where something in you is watching. The feeling is real. It is not diminished by being watched. The grief is still grief. The fear is still fear. The weight is still weight. And yet in this sitting, with the ground of the practice beneath you, something holds. The awareness does not go under. You are present with the feeling, inside it, and watching. The old teachers held that this watching is among the most significant shifts in the entire practice. It marks the moment when the practitioner stops being simply the contents of their experience and begins to be the awareness in which the contents arise. It requires only that the ground has settled enough for the seeing to be possible. And in this sitting, after all those returns, after all those patient redirectings, the ground has settled. Stay with that for a moment. Awareness is here. The grief is here inside awareness. Awareness is not the grief. The fear is here inside awareness. Awareness is not the fear. Both of these things are true at once, and the ground of the practice is what makes it possible to hold them both without one erasing the other. The old teachers would have recognized what is happening in this sitting. They would have said, quietly and with precision, that what is watching is the mind's natural lucidity, the quality of perception that becomes available when the ground is stable enough for clear seeing to arise. What becomes visible from this ground is something the tradition considered fundamental. The feeling is moving. It is not a fixed thing. It arose. It has a shape and a peak and a passing. This is not something you are reasoning your way toward in this moment, although you have known it as an idea for years. This is something you can feel. The feeling moving through the body like weather moving through a landscape, changing the terrain as it passes, and then continuing past. The thought comes now, the one the mind has been circling all week, the one that carries the weight of everything unresolved. It enters the sitting the way it always does, with authority, with the sense of being necessary, with the suggestion that if you just think it through one more time, it might finally resolve. You see it arrive before it has taken root. This is new. Usually the thought has already settled itself into the center of awareness before you realize it is there. This time you feel it approaching. You feel its particular texture, the way it carries a quality of urgency that belongs to the thought itself, rather than necessarily to the situation it is describing. You recognize it. This is the thought I have been thinking all week. You do not refuse it. You do not push it away. You simply see it. And in the seeing, something releases. The thought does not require your participation in the way it usually does. Its content is still present. The concern beneath it is real. And it is also a movement in the mind, arriving, lingering, already beginning to pass, like weather rather than a sealed room. Something settles in the body when this is felt directly. A release somewhere lower in the belly, the particular softening of held breath. The worry does not need to be solved tonight. The mind can hold the concern without being required to carry it through the night, as if carrying it were the same as resolving it. These are two different things. And in this sitting, for the first time in days, they are felt as two different things. There is a relief in this. Not the relief of the problem disappearing, but the relief of no longer being required to be the problem. The concern is there. You are here. These are two different things, and tonight they are felt as two different things. And in that difference, a breath is possible that was not possible an hour ago. The sitting continues. The mind moves and returns. Another feeling rises and is watched as it rises. Another thought passes through and is seen as it passes. Each time the ground holds. Each time the awareness remains larger than whatever arrives within it. The difficulty of the week has not dissolved. Something else has changed. The quality of the ground from which the difficulty is being met. This is what the old teachers pointed at when they spoke of equilibrium. The tradition has two names for what happened in this sitting. The first is stability, the mind that has found the ground and learned to stay on it. The second is lucidity, the quality of clear seeing that becomes available from that stable place. These two qualities are not separate achievements arriving one after the other. They condition each other. The more stable the mind becomes, the more clearly it perceives. The more clearly it perceives, the less it is disturbed by what it sees, and the more stable it becomes. Each quality feeds the other. In a deepening, the practice supports rather than directs. The old teachers spoke of this through the image of a polished mirror. A mirror, clouded by dust, cannot reflect what stands before it. The polishing is the work of the practice, patient and incremental, clearing the accumulated disturbances from the surface until the mirror's natural reflective quality is restored. When the mirror is clean, it reflects without effort. Reflection is simply what a clean mirror does. The mirror did not acquire its reflective quality through the work of polishing. The quality was already present beneath it, covered by accumulation until the polishing cleared it. And the mind that has spent months returning patiently to the breath, through difficult evenings and scattered sittings and hours that felt like nothing was happening, has been doing exactly this, clearing the surface so that what was always beneath it can finally show through. The stability and the lucidity of tonight's sitting were not created tonight. They were uncovered. The deposits made in every returned breath, every patient sitting, every hour that felt like it went nowhere, were building toward this, the moment when the surface had settled enough for the depth to show through. The body knows this. When the mind is agitated, the body holds itself accordingly. The shoulders ride higher than they need to. The jaw carries a tension so habitual it has stopped registering as tension. The breath stays in the upper chest, shallow and slightly effortful. When the mind settles, the body releases downward. The shoulders lower without instruction. The breath finds the belly. The jaw softens. The limbs take on the restful heaviness of a body that has been given permission to stop. These are not metaphors. The settling of the mind and the settling of the body are one event seen from two angles. The old teachers understood mind and body as a single living field, entered from either direction, responsive to shifts in either domain. The practitioner who has learned to follow the breath through a difficult sitting is not only training the mind. They are training the body to know that it is possible to be steady in difficulty, that the ground does not give way every time something difficult arrives. The practitioner leaving this sitting carries something back into the week that a principle alone cannot carry. The body has been in a difficult state and held its ground. It knows this now the way the hands know a familiar grip, through repetition and contact rather than description. That knowledge is available next time, and in the quiet mornings, and in the difficult conversations that are still coming. The evening ends. You open the eyes slowly. The week is still the week it was. The conversation is still unresolved. The meeting is still tomorrow. And something has shifted in the quality of the person standing up from the sitting, something small and quietly durable, like a stone set into the ground rather than resting on the surface of it. The old teachers said this was the most important thing they could offer. The peace you are looking for is not absent from this very mind. It is obscured. And the clearing, one breath and one returning at a time, is already underway. That ground has one further quality the old teachers returned to again and again, because they considered it the most important thing that could be said about the nature of awareness itself. It is a quality the practice reveals, already present before any instruction was given. And what it reveals, the old teachers said, has been here all along, closer than the breath, older than the practice, waiting for the moment when the water finally stills long enough for the depth to become visible. There is a moment in a sitting, perhaps you have already touched it, when something shifts beneath the practice itself. The body has settled, the breath has steadied, and something else is present. Something prior to both, as if the room behind the room had quietly opened. The old teachers considered this the most important discovery the practice could offer, more important than any technique, any instruction, any system of development ever assembled. They returned to it in text after text, century after century, not because it needed defending, but because they wanted you to stop mistaking yourself for something less than what you are. One of the oldest teachings in the entire canon is also one of the shortest. The Buddha said to his monks, "This mind is luminous, and yet it is defiled by defilements that arrive from outside." That last phrase is the one to rest in. Arrive from outside. What the teaching does not say is that the defilements are native to the mind. The confusion, the agitation, the fear, the craving. None of these are what the mind fundamentally is. They arrive. They are guests, not permanent residents. Visitors, moving through while the host remains. The host, the mind itself, is luminous. There is a reason the teaching uses that particular word. Luminous rather than pure, rather than perfect, rather than enlightened. The word describes a function, not a moral condition or an achievement. It means to illuminate. What the mind is, in its original nature, is the capacity to know, to receive experience and be aware of it. That capacity is already here, already working, already doing what it has always done. Even now, even in this moment, even as the mind wanders and the body grows heavy and the day presses in around you. Luminous does not mean bright in the way a lamp is bright. It is not a state reached only in the deepest concentration, available only to those who have practiced for decades. The teachers who used this word were pointing to something far more immediate. They were pointing to the quality of awareness itself, the sheer fact that anything is known at all. Right now, as these words reach you, something here is receiving them. That something is not a thought, not a feeling, not a name you have given yourself. It is the knowing that is happening before all of those things. It is the awareness in which the thought appears, the space in which the feeling arises, the ground in which the sense of self takes its shape. That knowing, that bare registering of experience, has no opposite. It does not become more present when you are calm, or less present when you are struggling. The struggle is known by it. The calm is known by it. Even the sense of the mind being scattered, even that is held within something that has never scattered. This is what the teachers meant by luminous, a quality that has been here, undisturbed, the whole time. Consider an ember buried in ash. The ash is cold. You look at the heap and see no light. You might conclude that the fire is gone, that what remains is only the residue of something that once burned. Reach in carefully, and beneath the grey surface, the ember is still there, still warm, still holding the possibility of flame. The practice does not create that ember. It clears the ash away. Every sitting you have ever done, every moment you return to the breath, set aside the phone, softened the grip of a thought. Every one of those moments was clearing ground, removing what had accumulated, revealing what was already present beneath. The practice is excavation, and what it uncovers has been here the entire time. What gets uncovered is familiar to you, even if you have not yet found the words for it. It is the quality you touch in the moment just before sleep, when the storyline finally loosens and the mind rests for a few seconds in its own nature before the lights go out. It is the quality in the pause between one breath and the next, when the body is completely still and there is nothing the awareness needs to do. It is what remains when exhaustion has been so complete that even the effort to hold everything together finally gives way. The word the teachers used was luminous because the quality makes other things visible while remaining itself unseen. The way the sky holds the clouds without becoming any particular cloud. Awareness holds experience without becoming any particular experience. Understanding this changes the posture of the practice from the inside. If you believed, as many people do, without ever examining it, that the agitation and the fear and the restlessness are what you fundamentally are, then the practice becomes a battle. You are fighting your own nature. Every time the mind scatters, that is evidence of your inadequacy. Every moment of peace is a temporary victory in a war you suspect you cannot win. The teaching offers something else entirely. The agitation is adventitious. It arrived, which means it is passing through. You are learning to stop mistaking the weather for the sky. The weather comes. The weather goes. Fear arrives, crests, recedes. Agitation fills the morning, then thins by afternoon. Grief moves through the body like a season, consuming everything for a time, and then at some point the light changes and something different arrives. None of it stays. None of it was the sky. The sky is unchanged. It holds all of it. After the darkest night, the sky is still the sky, completely itself, unmarked, open. This is a description of something you can verify in your own experience, in this moment, right now. Notice that as you listen, thoughts are arising. Perhaps images, perhaps the sound of words forming in your mind, perhaps a drift towards something left unfinished, a task, a conversation you keep returning to. These are the contents of the mind. They are real and they matter, and they are not the mind itself. What is aware of the thought? Stay with that for a moment, as an invitation, not as a puzzle to be solved. The ordinary movement of awareness is always toward content, toward the thought, the sensation, the problem, the plan, always looking at something, very rarely turning to look at the looking itself. When it does, even briefly, something subtle is recognized. The awareness itself has no shape. It has no texture, no color, no location you can point to. It does not contract when the thought is unpleasant. It does not expand when the breath settles. It is simply here, receiving, registering, knowing, without preference, without fatigue, without boundary. The old Tibetan teachers had a phrase for this first glimpse, recognizing the face of your own nature. Something that has always been here is being recognized. In every moment of every sitting, in every moment of every ordinary day. Present all along, hidden because the attention was always somewhere else. Everything in this practice, everything you have been working with across these hours, has been preparation for this recognition. The relaxation was not merely physical comfort. When the body releases its held tension, the mind that has been managing the body can finally stop managing. The energy held in that effort becomes available for something more subtle. The loosening of the grip creates the conditions for the ground to be felt. The breath was a thread back to the present moment, and the present moment is the only place where the nature of the mind can be recognized. What the breath practice was doing was teaching you to arrive in the only place where what you were looking for has ever been. Working with the 5 winds, the desire, the aversion, the fog, the restlessness, the doubt, was learning to see that these patterns are visitors. Every time you recognized one without being consumed by it, you were practicing something essential. The difference between being the weather and being the sky. You were touching, briefly and practically, the ground beneath the pattern. Stability gave the mind a place to stand. Without stability, the recognition cannot be held. The mind glimpses something and immediately rushes toward it, and in the rushing loses the very stillness that made it visible. Stability is the platform from which the depth becomes accessible. Lucidity cleared the final veil. The mind that can see clearly, without the fog of forgetting, without the weight of dullness, that mind can begin to recognize what it actually is, rather than what it has long assumed itself to be. All of it, every part of what you have been doing, was clearing the path back to a home you never left. The word the old text uses, adventitious, carries a meaning worth resting in. It means arriving from outside, added to something whose original nature was different. Like dust on a mirror, the dust is real. The dust obscures the reflection. The dust requires attention and care to clear away. And yet the dust is not the mirror. The mirror's nature is to reflect clearly. That has always been its nature. The dust arrived later. This matters for how you understand the work of a lifetime. If the confusion and the craving and the fear are adventitious, if they are the dust rather than the mirror, the task of the practice is not to change what you fundamentally are. It is to let the mirror be what it already is. That is a different kind of effort than the one most people bring to this. Most come to practice believing something is wrong with them, that they are too anxious, too angry, too scattered, too broken by what has happened. They hope the practice will fix what is damaged, will produce a version of themselves they can finally live with. The teaching does not say that person is wrong to come. It does not say the pain they carry is not real. What it says is more radical than any cure. The one who needs fixing does not exist in the way they think they do. What they are, underneath the accumulated weight of that story, is already what they were searching for. The practice is not the cure. The practice is the way of discovering that you were never the disease. This recognition is available anywhere. There will be a moment, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps already today, when you are in an ordinary situation and you notice the noticing. You are in a conversation, and just behind the listening, there is an awareness that is not the content of the conversation. You are walking, and just beneath the movement, there is a stillness that the movement happens inside of. You are caught in a moment of worry, the familiar tightening, the mind reaching ahead into things it cannot control. And then, for one instant, something releases, and what remains is the awareness that the worry was always happening inside. These are small openings into what is ordinary, into what is, in fact, always the case. The luminosity of the mind is not a peak experience. It does not require extraordinary conditions. It is available in the middle of the grocery store, in the middle of an argument, in the middle of a night that will not end, because it is never absent. Even in the deepest confusion, even in the worst moments of a life, the luminosity is present. Obscured, the way the sun is obscured by cloud cover, but the clouds do not touch the sun. The confusion does not touch the awareness that holds the confusion. The suffering does not reach the ground in which the suffering appears. This is not a prescription for bypassing pain. The pain is real. The body feels it. The mind registers it. What shifts is the relationship, the way you hold the pain rather than the pain itself. When you have touched, even once, the awareness that can hold the pain without being the pain, something irreversible has happened. The ground has been found, and a ground found once can be found again. There is something the teachers said about this that carries a particular tenderness. They said that even a glimpse, even the briefest moment of recognition, leaves something behind that does not dissolve. The way a door, once seen, cannot be unseen. You may turn away from it. Weeks will pass when the recognition is nowhere near the surface. The pressures of ordinary life will crowd in, and the practice will lapse, and the quality will seem far away. And then something quiet will happen. A breath, a pause between two moments, a night when the grip finally releases, and the door will be there again. As it always was, as it always will be. The door does not lock from the outside. Settle into this now, as quietly as you can. The mind resting in its own nature is the most ordinary thing there is. You have been doing this for as long as you have been alive. In the gaps between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats, in every moment when experience was simply present without needing to be anything other than what it was. What the practice offers is the recognition. The moment the mind finally turns toward what it has always been and knows. Yes, this is it. This was always it. The foundation has always been here. It is here now. And the part of you that knows that, the part receiving these words, registering this stillness, holding this moment, that part has never been anywhere else. Rest in that now. Let the knowing be more familiar than any thought about it could ever be. What remains when all the effort to understand has finally stopped? What remains is a fullness the mind cannot manufacture and has never needed to create. It has always held you. It holds you now. It will go on holding you when this voice has gone quiet and all that remains is the one who is listening. Stay where you are. There is nothing to do from here, and nothing to understand that has not already been touched. Nothing to carry forward except this. The simple, undemanding awareness that has been present the whole time. The mind may move. Let it move. The breath will continue on its own. Let it continue. Whatever arises in the body, sensation, warmth, the slight weight of the limbs in stillness, let all of it be exactly as it is. You have been in this place before. In the quiet before sleep, in the pause between two thoughts, in every moment when experience was simply present and did not require anything of you. This is that place. It has no edges, no bottom, no end. And it has never, not once, not in any of the difficulty you have moved through, been absent from you. Rest here now. Let whatever has been held begin to soften. Let the knowing simply be knowing, without needing to know anything in particular. This is the ground. It is here. It is always here.